when you ban a country, we're seeing it right now with Russia. There's still American businesses doing business with Russia today. They can't decouple that. So it's an interesting world we live in.
And also, we'll get into the UFO thing a little bit, because
let's
I bet you feel pretty vindicated right
first, man.
Yeah,
Like,
you got to feel vindicated right now.
I'm going to say it right now. Wi-Fi technology came from the UFOs, right? That's absolutely. But no, if you think about it, like late 90s, computer security, what did people do back then? A big deal back then was I have a wireless network, right? I'm going to go from Ethernet to wireless. I had the PCMCIA cards, put them in my laptop, and you could only get an hour of battery life and stuff like that. Now, you guys are doing stuff at Second Front that was basically illegal when I was at the NSA. Like, let's take DoD data, put it on somebody else's server, and bring it to the warfighter, right? Like, that's basically science fiction. You can almost hear, like a heavy weather or Silicon Diamond Age, that kind of stuff, talking about, the DoD server was rendered with this kind of cryptography, which allowed the soldier paratrooping in with his virtual reality, augmented reality going. Yeah, that's kind of what's going on. But, just where we're at right now with AI and with the explosion of all this content that's out there, I think anybody who's trying to predict the future has no idea, has absolutely no idea. Because AI predictions for the last 20, 25 years has been AI sucks. All of a sudden, AI is cool. So we'll see if it's legal, just in 1 or 2 elections from now.
Yeah, so it's interesting from a regulatory standpoint, and then also just from think about sort of the consumption, sort of the human brain, the understanding of, what's real, what's right, what's fact. Where are you seeing sort of folks figure out that calibration between signal and noise? And are you seeing solutions coming in that are starting to maybe contribute to that and that subset of the market coming? Or is it still about sort of pumping out volume and like a dopamine hit?
Yeah, so the technology is exploding so fast across everything, right? Cyber, AI, just advances in new type. Apple just announced their wearable, that sort of thing. So you have this sort of issue of you've got fear of missing out. Like anybody who's a tech professional, whether they're in their end of their career, the start of their career, how do you keep up with everything? And then you have people who have the burnout factor. It's like, how many conferences can I go to? How many podcasts can I listen to? How many books can I read? How do I stay up with everything, right? But then the reality of what's true, what should I do, what's common knowledge, what's best practice, it's so hard to know that, right? Even in cybersecurity, we have different big things. We have different standards. We don't, Rick Howard's got a book out called Cyber First Principles. His point is we don't have a set of first principles. And even if we think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which I think is a good baseline, it's kind of hard for the common person to apply that because we don't teach those things in school.
You've got a rapidly, to your point about the regulatory landscape, using AI as a perfect example. I've joked before, right, when I was at Calypso before Second Front, I spent way more time than I'm proud of sort of walking the halls of the Hill trying to convince Congress that, hey, we need to get ahead of adversarial machine learning, the art of the possible with, they weren't necessarily deep fakes back then, but it was like, hey, we can do all of this stuff, data poisoning, and they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. Now it's a huge deal. We're like 5 to 10 years behind the curve. So as you think about an understanding of from the legislative and sort of the executive branches, and also inability to govern in a timely manner, what are you expecting to see sort of over the next 12 to 24 months, recognizing that tech is going to continue to accelerate? What's that look like?
So the public's becoming very, very aware, thanks to the Chinese balloon, thanks to the TikTok discussion, thanks to things like the government, trying to ban Huawei, trying to ban, DJI drones, that sort of things. But I think where this is going to go, if you look at the national cybersecurity strategy, where they're trying to sprinkle cyber responsibility through the entire ecosystem, the coder all the way to the consumer, that sort of thing, it's going to manifest really interesting. We've all seen made in China stamps on things, but what about data hosted in China? Like, that's probably a label the people don't want to put on it, but the reality, if it's there, it's interesting. Now, what about AI trained in China? What about, so how do you know these things as a consumer? Where is this data coming from? Of course, with AI, it's all about the data, right? How did it get trained? If I've got a bunch of bozos who are using it and giving it bad data, did it drift after that? And of course, if I'm, people, like if you've read, Oh my God, Everybody Lies, for example, that book, we all know that we tell Google our darkest secrets, right? Not our priests, not our spouses. We tell Google that. And apparently with ChatGPT, it's even worse. It's like, hey, take this sensitive source code and make it better, right? So what does that mean from a legislation point of view? Congress is always caught up at the last second, and that's kind of being kind, because usually you don't have a body of people who are out there who are, C programmers and network engineers and that sort of thing. But I think the population really cares a lot about this, so they're getting smart. There's an AI commission now. There's a China commission. We actually had, this is the first year we had the Office of the National Cybersecurity Director. So there's a lot of positive momentum going on. But man, when I go to DC and I introduce myself as a cyber investor, people kind of go, "What's that?" So there's still a gap.
So when you talk about, data hosted in or model trained, and it's a really interesting concept, and I kind of want to click into that because I don't think you're wrong, right? I think that's a really unique way to look at it. Does the world become smaller, and does that sort of put us at odds with what I think is sort of like a rose-colored glasses view on globalization? And what does that end up looking like?
So I think right now one of the biggest geopolitical issues with AI that people aren't talking about is that if I'm choosing to outsource my content creation, I'm glad you're not outsourcing your content creation. We're creating your content right here, right? But let's say I'm outsourcing that, whether it's the news, and I'm getting, let's just say, cheaper labor than the U.S., right? Yep. Pick whatever analogy you want, their example you want. And I don't have to go to those countries, and I can just go to an AI and do it, and maybe it's just as good, if not better. That's going to have an interesting effect on that. Now, most of what I've seen so far is that it's teams of humans and AIs that are outperforming just humans or just AI people. But the question is, how long is that going to go on? I have a personal goal right now to create a whole Gula Tech Adventures video for my show where everything is done from tools, and I'm just controlling the tools. I've already made myself talk, which sounds kind of a weird thing to do, but once you can do that, you can just kind of unleash yourself and go forth and do that. Now, what happens long term, we'll see. Like I said before about AI, if I'm buying an AI, how do I know what I got in the model, yep, right? And then if I'm using it, I have a bunch of, let's just say I've got a bunch of clowns using it, and they're constantly telling it bad things, like don't believe that. How do I know it hasn't changed? And again, how do you know what people are sending to that is if it's sensitive or not? So these are some of the big things that are going on right now.
Yeah, and I think the proxy aspect of it history is cyclical, right? Like everything we're seeing now, we've seen before. It's just been dressed a little bit differently and called something different. I think you end up in this really interesting proxy war where, war might be the wrong term, a proxy sort of conflict, where, we put a hard line around China. We're like, okay, great. That's easy. That's the layup for Congress. Then when we start to talk about, hey, the Chinese have staked these 15 African countries, these 6 South American countries, and these 7 East Asian countries, to the point that those countries have defaulted on a debt. China now owns their infrastructure. They're effectively controlling the country. Are they on the list of places we can't host and trust? Are they not? Does that mean we're now isolating and sort of ceding? And I think that is a really interesting sort of juxtaposition of intellectual and geopolitical challenges that I'm not sure if folks are really prepared to wrap their heads around.
And a good example of that, how that manifests kind of in my world, we have a company right now called Shard Secure, which uses file sharding. If you think of like how a RAID disk drive can carve up a file and put it on multiple disks for reliability, performance, whatever, different models, that you can do the same thing across the cloud. And you might think about, hey, I'm leaving Amazon and going to Google, or leaving Google, going to Amazon. Those are real things that happen out there. But maybe I have to quickly leave Poland, right? Maybe I have to quickly leave an African country. Maybe I have to quickly leave Middle East. And if people aren't engineering things like that today, then they're not ready for the world of tomorrow, because we have all sorts of potential political instability of overnight, banning a country because we find out they're human rights violations, they're tight with China. And, when you ban a country, we're seeing it right now with Russia, there's still American businesses doing business with Russia today. They can't decouple that. So it's an interesting world we live in.